Lowkey, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. I'm wondering if you have a comment to make on the situation now in Gaza, because I hadn't quite known that this pier to God knows where that Joe Biden and his allies are building in Gaza was literally being built with the rubble from the houses destroyed by the Israeli Air Force and other munitions supplied by the United States, and that rubble literally contained the bones, the skulls of the people who'd been in those buildings before they were reduced to rubble. Now, I was suspicious, like I've no doubt you were, as to what the purpose of this pier was when there's thousands of trucks just through the gate, the Rafah gate, that could have been allowed in. But Netanyahu told us today what he thinks the pier is for. It's to achieve the illegal ethnic cleansing of potentially 2.3 million Palestinians out of Palestine altogether to points God knows where. What's your observation on this?
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, George. I really appreciate it, and I want to congratulate you on your momentous victory in Rochdale. You really put the fear of God into the political elite in this country, and that is something we can all be thankful for. Now, in the case of this port being built on the edge of Gaza, what you had was last week a report pointing out that for a long time, Netanyahu and those around him had seen this as a very good way to control the population in Gaza. We also know that there have been massive deals for oil and gas companies to exploit the resources in and around the Gaza Strip. What we also know is that the US company that is vying for the contract is populated by and staffed by former Defense Department employees and intelligence agency figures from the United States. And the bill is likely to be footed by Gulf states, with one particular Gulf state already offering over 60 million to help with the campaign. And of course, it was also published last week in the Israeli press that there are those within the Israeli political elite who will see it as the perfect subterfuge through which the depopulation of Gaza can be sought in a way which is slightly less scandalous for Israel and its relations with Egypt, for example. We do know that the Sinai Human Rights Organization released footage of camps being set up on the Egyptian side of Rafah with the intention of absorbing large amounts of Palestinians. We also know that the Egyptian government received an increase in the loans from the IMF by over $5 billion, in fact, giving some clue as to what that may be for when looking at the massive displacement of human beings, which is imminent in Gaza. So, of course, the port being built on the edge of Gaza will be will have multi-purpose multi-purposes. And also we know that the US are sending around 1,000 soldiers to help with the construction of all of this. So this is really a worrying situation indeed, and a further stage in the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza.
We, of course, will have a change of president almost certainly in November, but not a change of policy if his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is anything to go by. He said in an interview today, I think, that Gaza is a rather attractive beachfront property opportunity for Israel. And when asked by his interviewer, but would that mean the Palestinians would not be able to go back? He said there's nothing for them to go back to. He encouraged Israel to bulldoze the Negev desert and transfer the Palestinians to there. I'm not saying that Trump will necessarily follow the politics of his son-in-law, but it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Well, of course, it's known that in the 90s, when Benjamin Netanyahu used to visit New York, he actually stayed in the bedroom of Jared Kushner while he was a young man playing basketball in university. Jared Kushner has performed a vital role for the Israelis in terms of integrating them both economically and even militarily with several Gulf countries. So, for example, the Shaldag unit, which led the first raid on the Shifa hospital, is equipped by a company called the Shlomo Group. This is an Israeli vehicle company. But this company, the Shlomo Group, is owned by something called Affinity Partners. Now, Affinity Partners is Jared Kushner's own initiative that is funded by the Saudi government, meaning you have Saudi money going into currently equipping the Shaldag unit, which raided a Shifa hospital. Extremely scandalous, but that could not have taken place without the hard work of Jared Kushner. What we also have to remember about the Trump factor in all of this is that in 2007, a handwritten note from the Benjamin Netanyahu political campaign was leaked to the Israeli newspaper, which y.net is its website. Now, this handwritten note had on it the names of potential funders for the Benjamin Netanyahu political campaign. And one of the names on that list, alongside figures like Sheldon Adelson and Rupert Murdoch, which is seriously concerning considering the level of media influence that Murdoch has had in Britain over the decades and around the world for that matter, was of course Donald Trump as well. So the relationship and the kinship and the affinity that exists between Trump, Netanyahu, and that particular Jabotinskyite thrust and manifestation of the Zionist movement cannot be underestimated. And so for the next phases of war that Israel is likely to launch in the region, Biden has gone over and above to demonstrate his fealty to this push by Netanyahu. We can't forget that across this period, the United States has carried out 100 secret arms deals with Israel. Israel has bombed Gaza so much over this period that it is now using ammunition, surplus ammunition from the Korean War in the 50s from the United States. So really, it is a bipartisan orthodoxy in the US, this servility to Israel. So we must be concerned for the days ahead.
Well, bipartisan servility is, of course, the order of the day here too, but not hitherto in Ireland. I'm not a fan of Leo Varadkar, the outgoing Taoiseach, Prime Minister of Ireland, but I thought he spoke very powerfully, eloquently, and bravely to the face of Joe Biden about Gaza, about Palestine, in Washington just a couple of days ago. And 3 days later, he has now tendered his shock resignation. Are these two things in any way connected, do you think?
Well, of course, as you will well know, George, Ireland has the claim to being a neutral country. But what does that neutrality actually mean? It means the United States military has free range access and use of Shannon Airport. It means that the Irish military has been involved in training Ukrainian forces in the light of this NATO campaign against Russia. But more worrying than that is something that took place during the reign of Alan Shatter as Justice Minister in Ireland. Now, Shatter is a well-known Israel lobbyist now, but in previous his previous role as Justice Minister, he went on record as claiming that the very recording systems that are operated within Irish police stations, the infrastructure used by the elite units of the National Bureau of Investigation, the Criminal Assets Bureau, and other key institutions in the Irish security state were replaced with recorders from a company known as NICE Systems. Now, NICE Systems is a subsidiary of Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest arms company. So what you have here is a state which is on paper pro-Palestinian, certainly, actually having Israeli infiltrated intelligence infrastructure built into it. In addition to that, very concerningly, over the past decade or so, an outfit by the name of Forward Thinking, which has a director by the name of Chris Donnelly from the Institute of Statecraft, who brought us the well-known Integrity Initiative. It has other figures involved in it who are either former, or in the case of Chris Donnelly, current British military intelligence. This organization, Forward Thinking, has worked for many years to organize meetings between Likud and Sinn Féin, and those meetings have taken place. This form of normalization and this targeting and the use of Ireland really as a laboratory for a lot of these projects has taken place. So while the political elite in Ireland is being pushed into making pronouncements, you will well remember that this statement being made was something that took place after a campaign calling against Irish politicians from going to the United States on St. Patrick's Day. So while it obviously was an emotive speech which connected with many people across the world, the mere meeting of Biden was really a demonstration of US power in this situation. So it will be interesting to see what happens next in the Republic of Ireland.
Now, you're, of course, a giant figure in show business, in the world of hip-hop and so on. I wanted to ask you your take on the extraordinary events, all in the interests and in the name of freedom, of course, that took place around TikTok in the United States last week, where TikTok has been ordered to be sold to an American company or maybe an Israeli company, maybe both. But TikTok is to be banned in the name of freedom, even though hundreds of millions of views of TikTok from the American public are recorded daily. What's your take on that?
Well, let's remember this, George. A lot of the propaganda around TikTok is aimed at convincing people in the United States that TikTok may be spying on them for a foreign government. Well, let's be clear. The US Department of Defense has its data handled by a company by the name of Oracle. Now, Oracle is the brainchild of Larry Ellison, one of the closest friends of Benjamin Netanyahu, and Ellison actually offered the directorship of Oracle to Benjamin Netanyahu, meaning Netanyahu stood to be the director of the company that handles the data for the US Department of Defense. In addition to that, Larry Ellison is the largest donor to the Friends of the IDF charity, which funnels funds directly into the Israeli occupation forces in the history of the organization. So you may have some form of an issue with national security, but it's certainly not from the Chinese. And even Nancy Pelosi went on record just a few days ago saying that Netanyahu attempted to interfere in US elections. But also, let's deconstruct these allegations against TikTok. Well, actually, contrary to what they will try and tell you, there has been an attempt to infiltrate and control TikTok, but it hasn't been the Chinese. No, the content policy lead for TikTok Canada, for example, is a gentleman by the name of Alexander Corbeil, who is simultaneously the vice president of the NATO Association of Canada. Another interesting example of an employee at TikTok who is an ex-NATO employee is Ford Copeland. We don't know if he is a relative of the famous CIA man Miles Copeland, but he previously, before working in trust and safety at TikTok, was a desk officer for NATO and the Department of Defense. Now, something which I published myself was the current feature policy manager of TikTok is a gentleman by the name of Greg Anderson. Now, according to his own LinkedIn profile, until 2019, Anderson worked on psychological operations for NATO. After I published information about that, he changed his LinkedIn profile to not mention the psychological operations aspect of his work at NATO. You also have Bo Patterson working as a threat analyst for TikTok's Trust and Safety division. Now, between 2017 and 2020, Patterson was a targeting analyst for the CIA. What we also know is Victoria McCullough, who previously worked for the Department of Homeland Security and for the White House itself. She now works on trust and safety at TikTok. And another interesting figure at trust and safety at TikTok is Christian Cardona, who spent 13 years in senior roles at the State Department. What we have to see happening with this TikTok is a convergence of different interests. So on one side, you have the war hawks of the US regime who have been seeking for a long time to make TikTok a sacrificial lamb in their propaganda war against China. But what you have on the other side is the Israel lobby. Now, at the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, which let's not forget, the ADL is so deeply considered to be a proxy of Israel that even the FBI, in an internal memo in 1969, wrote the following words: "It is incredible to assume that information given to the ADL is not furnished to an official of the Israeli government." The ADL, it shares funders with illegal settlements in the West Bank and the Friends of the IDF. Now, the ADL came out and said in a private recording which became public, Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, said, "We have a Gen Z problem and a TikTok problem," pointing specifically to young people using TikTok to pass around information about Gaza. Now, the ADL has spied for decades for the Israeli government. You have examples of them even spying on Desmond Tutu for the apartheid regime in South Africa. And so this campaign to push TikTok into other hands, we now see the pro-Israel stalwart and Secretary of the Treasury under Donald Trump, Steve Mnuchin, has stated his intention to gather investors under his umbrella to buy TikTok. Now, we don't know if those investors will include his close friend Yossi Cohen, the former director of Mossad, who Mnuchin previously asked to join his other investment fund. So it's certainly interesting what will happen next. But what we do know for sure is that Israel is seriously concerned with the free flow of information, even in a limited way, as is made available on TikTok.
I told them you were a genius. Lowkey, as always, a tour de force. Thanks for joining us.